Grab your favorite mug and fill it up with your favorite blend because we're getting ready to sit down and talk about Southwest Florida real estate. Cottrell Title and Escrow presents The Closing Experience, real estate talk over a cup of coffee. What are my closing fees going to be? Should I rent or should I finally purchase? Why do I have to send all of these documents to get a mortgage? The real estate process doesn't have to be frustrating. Let our experts at Cottrell Title and Escrow help make buying or selling real estate a dream. Here to answer all of your questions, our host, managing partner of Cottrell Title and Escrow, James Schlimmer.
Welcome everybody back to the Closing Experience Real Estate Talk over a cup of coffee. I'm your host, James Schlimmer with Cottrell Title and Escrow. Today's show is going to be mind-blowing because it's hard to wrap your mind around the subject of blockchain technology, number one. But once you do, and you do get, I would say, that elementary knowledge of what blockchain is, then you get this idea, and our guest kind of alluded to it today when he mentioned, hey, this tsunami is headed in every industry, right? So when you think about blockchain technology, number one, typically the question that comes up is, what is it? And if you don't know what it is, go to Google, do a search. But essentially, it's a digital distributed ledger that allows people to be able to transfer, and think about this is the key thing, transfer anything of value can be transferred in the most secure, immutable fashion that ever existed. So let's go a little bit deeper on that. Because what you have is you have people thinking, hey, blockchain, it's cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or blockchain. But what folks were able to think about was, hey, if you can transfer a coin the most secure way possible and it's trusted, why can't you secure anything? Which, for the sake of our show, which we are talking about all things real estate, it didn't take long for folks to be able to dive in and think about the world of real estate. Why can't real estate transfer on the chain? And that got my ears to perk up and say, wait a minute, what's going to happen in my industry, the title industry? And on that endeavor, I was able to see that one of the speakers at one of the International Blockchain Real Estate Association's events was an attorney by the name of James Salmon, who is out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And what I did is I reached out to James, who picked up on the first ring, which was great, and say, hey, I don't know anything about what's going on, but I know that you do. And I want to understand what's happening or what's on the horizon regarding blockchain and the construction industry. Now, James just happens to be a longtime litigating attorney in the construction industry and an expert in blockchain. So he has kind of invested his time. I'd love to know, which we'll ask him here as we introduce him, but he has made it kind of his mission to go around, educate folks, and try to get everybody on the same page and try to adopt where the future is taking us in the construction industry regarding blockchain. So with that, I would love to introduce Attorney James Salmon to the Closing Experience Real Estate Talk over a cup of coffee. James, how are you?
I'm good, James. Thanks for having me. This is an excellent setup here, and I'm excited to be here.
Now, typically what we do is everybody has their cup of coffee as we're on the Closing Experience, and it's just your standard blend. It's a Keurig machine out front in the lobby, so there's really nothing exciting about it. But let's get right into it, James. When we talk about blockchain and we talk about the construction industry, one, when was your aha moment where you said, you know what is this? And I need to know, I need to research this. What is the blockchain?
So about 5 or 6 years ago, I began teaching a course out of Middlesex University in London. The UK government had mandated BIM on all projects worth more than £5 million on a going forward basis beginning in 2016. So back in 2010, Middlesex University stood up a new program, and that program is a BIM strategy course. You have to have 5 years of industry experience, and they reached out to me for assistance in putting together the curriculum for that course, and the professors and the leadership at the university who were putting that course together apparently were impressed with my knowledge base, and they invited me to teach a portion of that course. So for the past since I guess 2012 or 2013, I've been teaching the cultural and legal implications of BIM and IPD, BIM being Building Information Modeling and IPD being Integrated Project Delivery. So the idea is that you're going to virtually plan, design, and construct a facility or a built asset on the computer screen before you ever stick a shovel in the ground. And then when you build that asset, you're going to build it in accordance with lean continuous improvement techniques that were made famous by Toyota. So software people understand it as agile software development. Lean Six Sigma is the name that most people understand it to go by in the business world. And in construction, we call it lean construction. So it's a way of bringing continuous improvement to everything that you do with respect to the physical delivery of that asset. Well, if you're going to combine the digital and the virtual, you're eventually going to run into blockchain. And about 2 years ago, one of my students at Middlesex University asked for help understanding blockchain and how this might impact construction. And I wound up doing a good bit of research, and that student is now graduating this May and writing a thesis on what the impacts of blockchain will be on the construction industry. So I've spent the past 2.5 to 3 years really steeping myself in the what it means to bring a digital world into, as you described it, an immutable, transparent, and highly secure environment where we can leverage that data on a going forward basis. And it's an exciting opportunity and one we haven't seen before in the industry.
So prior to the student bringing to you saying, hey, what do you think about blockchain in the construction industry? Did the word blockchain even mean anything to you yet? Or were you thinking about Bitcoin or any of that stuff or no?
I had been watching the Bitcoin universe. I was familiar with the efforts to stand up Ethereum. I knew that, this cryptocurrency thing was unfolding, and I thought it was very interesting, but I had not yet made the connection between what I would call a common data environment that you could stand up for a specific industry like the built environment, and the manner in which you could use blockchain, which I describe as the underlying software protocol that underpins Bitcoin. It's not a complicated bit of code. It's pretty straightforward. But the ramifications of using it on a global scale to empower more, the creation of smart contracts on that blockchain, and to use those smart contracts in the built environment was something that I was keenly interested in. I've always wanted to see my holy grail in the integrated project delivery environment is to have I always wanted the BIM, the Building Information Model, to replace my construction documents. So in litigating failed construction projects for 30 years, there was a recurring theme, and that theme was failure to communicate. That's what causes every piece of litigation that comes through a construction lawyer's door, is that there is a failure to communicate somewhere along the way, and it has manifested itself in a dispute that people are willing to pay money to lawyers to resolve. And that, to me, was the best, a really important reason to figure this stuff out. Because I went into the law to help people, not to put my kids through college on,
attorney's fees.
Attorney's fees. I wanted to solve problems. And this gives us an opportunity to solve a whole myriad of problems to as I describe it, do a system fix, a system reset for the built environment, and prepare us for what's coming next, which is a digital economy, a knowledge economy.
So I was sitting in, this was last August, I'm sitting in Florida Realtors in Orlando, Florida, and a gentleman by the name of George Blankenship was the keynote speaker. And George was an executive for Apple from 2003 to 11, the heyday. He was for Tesla, Amazon, and he kind of, long story short, he goes into, Steve Jobs with the iPhone. He says, Steve didn't do anything, he didn't invent anything new. Right. essentially, if you take the iPhone apart and he deconstructed it, you say, if you look at all the pieces, this is all stuff that currently existed. But what Steve Jobs was able to do, he was able to innovate and see all these different items that currently exist and put them together in a way that's never existed before. And he said, hey, what would everybody in the room, and there was about 2,000 real estate agents in the room, what would you do if I told you Amazon was getting into the real estate industry? And you can hear
the
gas roar. And he's like, you guys don't even know why you'd be all flustered, but you're flustered. And he says, well, they're not. He says, but who in here is going to innovate your industry because it's archaic, right? And I took that to heart and thinking about, hey, what currently exists in a real estate transaction and how could it be orchestrated together? And you can't, eventually, if you do that long enough, you could be as dumb as rocks, and you're going to get to the point of blockchain. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things you mentioned to me very early in a conversation was you said the construction industry is about 30 years behind in their systems and procedures and efficiencies and all of the above. So is the innovation in the construction industry not so much in, hey, the different ways you can build, but the back of the house, the efficiencies of getting everybody on the same page kind of going down, is that innovation the digital world combining with the physical world via the chain?
It is, and it's really hard to get people to buy into it because our built environment is based on a waste-based system. And so all of the existing players in the built environment make their bones off of waste. And since the delivery of a built asset in the built environment has a waste rate of something around, north of 60%. So 60% of the resources that are brought to bear on any capital project that delivers a built asset, there's going to be a 60% waste rate.
Yep.
Now, people freak out over that and think that either isn't true or that they can do better than that, and they certainly could do better than that. But you got to remember that even Toyota has a waste rate of 23 to 26% in their factory. So waste is not something that can be eliminated, but we can certainly manage it more effectively. In fact, a certain amount of waste is a little bit like fat in our body. It gives you a little cushion. There's some benefit to having a little waste as you structure a system, but we have an extraordinary amount of waste in the built environment. And as a result, we have created waste-based business models. And a waste-based business model is one whereby I anticipate extracting my profit from that waste stream.
Yep.
And the problem with that is that if I extract my profit from the waste stream, I must do so at the expense of someone else in that environment.
Ultimately, the client, the customer at the end is going to pay higher costs.
The customer is going to pay higher costs. Somebody else next to me in the process may get screwed in order for me to get ahead.
Yep.
And so because we're always making our bones in that built environment by extracting our profit from that waste stream, we're always putting a knife in somebody else's back. And so we create more mistrust because of the way our business models operate. And that process is contrasted with the value add business model that Toyota advocates. Sure. And that other enterprises are trying to utilize. The big time consumers of built industry services, like the Fortune 500 companies, the P&Gs of the world, GEs of the world, they all understand value-add business models and vertically integrated business models, and they're very frustrated when they encounter the inefficiencies in the built environment. But we in the built environment, all of our leaders tell them, oh, this is the way it is.
Just the way it is.
Just the way it is. This is the way it works. It's always been like this, and it's always going to be like this. And construction and real estate have something very much in common. It's that you're going to build that built asset on a parcel, okay? And you're going to be tied to that labor source in that arena, to the supplies in that arena, to the climate and the real, the reality of building on that parcel. So in real estate, it's the famous location, location, location.
Yep.
All right. So there's a reason that London was founded on the water, on the Thames River. There's a reason that New York City sits on Manhattan and there's a harbor. There's a reason that Tampa came up in a harbor. Location is absolutely critical in real estate. It's also where you have to build in the built environment. But the beauty of blockchain and the beauty of the new integrated delivery processes and the new virtual planning and design tools is that we're able to tap into knowledge bases on a global scale and access information in ways we've never imagined before as we go about delivering a built asset on a particular parcel.
Sure. So one of the things James mentioned, and I don't know who's going to be listening to this. We do have great follow base, but if you don't understand blockchain just yet, so trying to get your head wrapped around that, some of the things that James is talking about is in the current mold in any industry, but specifically we're talking about construction or the real estate industry as a whole, there are mass inefficiencies. And there is mass business that is created to operate because of those mass inefficiencies, right? Is one way to kind of summarize very quickly. And what happens is the fact that these mass inefficiencies have been going on forever, you have people that don't want to change, right?
Absolutely. And the best analogy, I'm an attorney by training, and I litigated for years, and I, as a trial attorney, I try to give people very, visual that they can take away. And the visual for the waste-based business model is to imagine a backwards bicycle. So a backwards bicycle is one where you have a sprocket on the front handlebars, and when you turn the handlebars to the right, the front wheel goes to the left. And when you turn the handlebars to the left, the front wheel goes to the right. Now, you and I can't ride that bike.
Yep. Nope.
It is, the algorithm in your head is such that, you learn to ride the bike growing up, you learn to ride a regular bike. Well, in the built environment, our business processes, our business models, our waste-based business models, anticipate climbing on a backwards bike. We ride that backwards bike in the built environment because, by God, we know how to ride that bike. I don't know how to ride a regular bike. I don't want to mess with a regular bike because I can't ride it. But I can ride this backwards bike. And guess what? Nobody else can ride it.
Yep.
If you haven't, put in the time and the blood, sweat, and tears and suffered the scrapes and the bruises of learning to ride the backwards bike, you can't compete in that built environment under a waste-based model without learning to ride that backwards bike.
Sure.
And the unfortunate reality is that we need to move our entire industry over to regular bikes, which are more efficient. And that's what the blockchain will enable. But everybody's very scared of that because they're very comfortable riding the backwards bike.
You alluded to the similarities between real estate and construction. And one of the things that immediately jumped to my mind is the fact that the data from whether the building, from breaking ground to the plans to everything, whether in the whole construction process to, hey, the purchase orders to what supplies were delivered to the screws and the model numbers. And in a real estate transaction, the appraisal, the survey, the closing documents. It seems that the data is just lost at all times. And that replication of having to redo all of that work every single time is one of the mass inefficiencies. So when I think about, hey, how blockchain could help, I'm thinking about the fact that, yep, we have somebody that owns a parcel of land that wants to build. They want to save money. And it's kind of like, I love this too because it's the practicality of how could this actually work? What needs to happen in order to do this? And it's usually, hey, who owns that piece of land is going to bid a job and say each GC needs to operate this the most efficient way possible. And they need to, I'm going to say operate on a chain, but you can correct me with this. But all of the data on that build flows up and is kept in some format and the other. It doesn't have to be real time, Internet of Things type thing, but it's kept. So if you think 10 years, 15 years from now, if that property is transferring again, there's a way to get to that data, and it's trusted because it's immutable. It's on the chain. It can't be tampered with. That has added value in mass efficiencies.
So let's do a little compare and contrast with the production of a title policy.
Sure.
And the process of discovery in a construction lawsuit. So in both instances, we always recreate the wheel. we go back and we start from scratch and we gather all this data
Yep.
over again. So your title insurance policy, however far it goes back,
Every time they go back to square one.
it is always starting over from square one
Yep.
and working your way forward. In construction, in a piece of litigation, I never wrote a budget for less than $100,000 on a major construction dispute. And I never litigated a major construction dispute that didn't involve at least 4 to 5 players. So that's $400,000 or $500,000 worth of sunk costs in just figuring out who's holding what cards.
Trying to put the puzzle pieces together.
Put the puzzle pieces
Yep.
together. So in the construction realm, if I take that common data environment that you were describing, not only do we not have to recreate the wheel for the title insurance policy each and every time, but wouldn't it be great to be able to, lawsuits settle when people know what their risks are, okay? So the way you learn your risks in a construction dispute is you hire lawyers who charge you $100,000 to spend the next year and a half digging through the banker's boxes filled with documents, sending subpoenas, serving discovery requests. And eventually, after about a year and a half, everybody has a pretty good lay of the land. And then the insurance companies all have to sue each other first.
Yep.
So we have to wait until they get through and figure out who's going to be responsible. And then, or maybe first they sue their own clients. So they'll sue their own insured first, saying, I don't owe you coverage or I don't owe you a defense. So once the insurance litigation is resolved, now we can get on to the business of trying to resolve the actual lawsuit. So everybody turns their cards up. It's kind of like playing cards with your 9-year-old, nephews or something. Everybody plays the first few rounds of the poker with the cards turned up so that you can see, well, if we could play construction poker with our cards turned up, then we wouldn't go and spend $100,000 on lawyers.
Sure.
So if you have a common data environment in which you're tracking all this information and doing it properly, then what you're talking about is turning those your poker hand up face up early in the process. And the earlier you can get all 52 cards turned up on the table, the earlier you can resolve pieces of litigation. Now, law firms don't like to hear that because, there's certain lawyers that, make their bones off of that waste-based process. Why would they want to take the golden goose that is construction litigation out behind the barn and chop its head off?
Why would we want title insurance policies to go down?
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Why should we have title insurance policies that you can buy for $599 instead of, $599?
Yep.
Well, because you can sell, the entities that figure it out are going to sell tens of thousands of title insurance policies for $599, or hundreds of thousands of title insurance policies for $599. And it's going to increase the efficiency and the productivity with which we get assets brought into a place where they can be productively used in our society. So it's a benefit on several different levels to create this common data environment that allows us to mine the data on an as-needed basis.
Sure. So, and one of the things that usually comes up is people will say, geez, it's never going to happen because legally they'll never be able to figure out a way to get this to happen. And I don't want to go down that rabbit's hole right now because I think there's more interesting conversation to go, but I will educate our listeners to say that conversation is happening today. And folks are trying to figure out a solution today. And just like you're able to actually trust the fact that you put your credit card and order something on Amazon and you're able to purchase something and it comes, and there are laws that protect the consumer and there are ways for these issues to be remedied, they're trying to figure that out today regarding blockchain, the construction, in really every industry. Mm-hmm. So that conversation is happening. What I want to ask you, James, is in the construction industry, you have obviously a general contractor. You have many different subs, and it's old school way of doing business. I mean, old school purchase orders and old school ordering mechanisms, and some are maybe still using fax machines. Or how do you even entertain the conversation with, and I want to use it's a plumber. We'll just say Joe's Plumber is a sub, but his son is interested in the future of what the industry is going to be. How do we get Joe, the plumber, to understand how he needs to operate his business in order to be able to survive in what this new world will be in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
I think it's a two-layered process. I think the first thing you got to do is help Joe understand how, if I can get a better handle on my costs and my supplies and my materials and my schedule, if I can begin to master those things in this digital environment, I can increase the efficiency with which I deliver my plumbing services. So I can be more competitive as a plumber in this environment if I just have a mastery of if I can digitize my supply chain, and make sure that I'm delivering that plumbing project in a way where I have control over it digitally. So if you can just digitize things, it increases efficiency and productivity.
Sure.
Now, what I don't want to see us do as an industry is to digitize existing processes that are inefficient or broken.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that happens quite a bit. But it's the first step to introducing people to these tools. The second step is to introduce Joe the plumber to the integrated project delivery approach and let Joe play in that sandbox a little bit.
Can you define, you did a wonderful job when we were off air, can you define the integrated project delivery?
So integrated project delivery is a process whereby an owner procures a built asset from an integrated team. So rather than asking a designer to design a project in a silo and then toss that set of construction documents over the wall to a bunch of general contractors and have them come pick through the documents and then bid it on a hard bid basis, and then they in turn toss those over the wall to the subs. What we do in an integrated project delivery environment is we bring that owner, contractor, and designer together, and we have that core team sign an integrated agreement. It's a legal instrument that the owner, the contractor, and the designer all sign, and it is intended to lay out the owner's goals and purposes. You know, what's the business purpose of this built asset?
Sure.
Why does an owner want to build it in the first place? And identify the owner's goals and make sure that the owner is really delivering or receiving from this integrated team exactly what they want. Also, what it does is it enables us to put the designer in the room with the constructor. And all of a sudden, your construction documents are going to get vastly better because your designer is going to be able to ask questions of and get responses from the constructor. And the constructor is going to be able to critique those documents before they have to build off those documents in the field. In the current environment, never shall they speak. You know, under in federal law, it's actually a felony for a general contractor to speak to a designer.
Wow.
It's a felony to have anybody in the general contracting community approach a federal designer because they don't want collusion
Sure.
to occur. They don't want any one general contractor to get one up on the other general contractors in the community. So we have statutes that criminalize communication between our general contracting community and our designers in a federal procurement world. That's insane. But it's only necessary because the federal government procures built assets under a design, bid, build model. If they were to adopt a full-on integrated project delivery model, then they could procure built assets from integrated teams. And essentially what the government would do is say, hey, 3 years out, we're going to put out an RFP that calls for bids from integrated teams. Before we do that, we want to have those integrated teams qualified. So we're going to do a series of workshops introducing this concept of integrated project delivery. And one of the ways that you become qualified is by attending the workshop. Come and learn how to play in this sandbox.
Yep.
And then form those teams and respond to our RFP. So that integrated project delivery approach is working very well up in Canada right now. There are some Canadian municipalities that are procuring built assets under an integrated project delivery approach from integrated teams that were formed after the municipality went through the process of setting up an actual workshop and introducing the AEC, the architect, engineering, and construction community, to the concept of integrated project delivery.
So it sounds like to me, though, there's a software, right, that will allow the designer, the builder, and the owner to be together, I would say, in a digital workspace.
There are probably a half a dozen or more
software
tools that are out there. So Autodesk has something called BIM 360 that purports to put the whole team in that environment on the same page. Bentley is another virtual planning and design tool. They have something called ProjectWise that is a tool and a resource in that regard. Tekla and Trimble have recently joined forces. I can't remember who bought who, but they're doing something very similar. There's a company called Procore that offers that kind of a tool and software tool. There are literally a dozen or more probably. Those are kind of the big ones that everybody knows. There's a new generation of software tools that are coming out that are geared towards the subcontractor market. So eSub and Plexus and several others are really trying to carve out some space related to the subcontractors and what their needs are. I've always wondered why we don't just do a project-specific Twitter account and have everybody,
everybody up there, right?
Everybody on the project is entitled to post and, it's an approved platform. The owner has the Twitter account and everybody on the project communicates via Twitter. It would be completely open and transparent, and take pictures of your RFI and send it, and everybody would look at it.
Does the software as it exists today, does it allow the actual... In my mind, it's, hey, you have a GC that says, I need, XYZ type concrete. I'm just going to throw that out there. And they know they need this much, right? And they're going to put that out to bid, right? And then you have, hey, in order to bid, you need to be part of this group, right? Or be able to communicate via this group. And when the actual job is done or items are delivered, is there a way within that software that's known? Or it doesn't go quite that deep just yet?
It doesn't go that deep yet.
Okay.
Right now what's happening is the vendors of the software tools are operating in their own silos. And they all have secret sauce that they're trying to protect.
Got it.
And so they have not yet figured out how they're going to compete on the blockchain. Eventually, my holy grail of all this is to have that common data environment in which all the data winds up on the blockchain.
Sure.
In the common data environment. And the various software tools are simply pretty simple apps that are designed to reach in and pluck out the data that's necessary to make this decision at this moment in time vis-a-vis concrete, for example. So now the civil engineer has put information about the scope and nature of the forms required and how deep the footings need to be for this facility.
Yep.
So now all of the concrete contractors in town ought to be able to look at that data and make decisions about how they would, bid that work if you were going to stay in a hard bid environment. But if you do IPD, you wouldn't stay in a hard bid environment. What you would do in an IPD world is you would form these integrated teams in advance. So in one of the teams up in Canada, there were 14 different team members. So there was the owner had put out a request for proposals from integrated teams, and they had a list of who needed to be on the team, and there were 14 different slots. So there was a general contractor, an architect, a structural engineer, a civil engineer, excavation company, concrete, steel. I mean, there were 14 different slots on the team that had to be filled if you wanted to respond to the RFP. And in Canada, some of the subs and the trades they can be on, and suppliers, they can be on multiple teams.
Yep.
So you can be the general contractor and the prime design team team up, and then they solicit the best trades and the best suppliers to come and join their team. And some of those suppliers and trades may be on multiple teams.
You did the example of, hey, structural engineer or civil engineer says, hey, the concrete footings for this particular property, if done, need to be X feet. And that information is readily available, right? Instead of every time that project goes out for bid or every time the new owner comes and work wants to get done, you're recreating that wheel every single time. But if you think about it, that methodology exists today. If we go to the public records and there's a deed there, we trust that deed is authentic because
Right.
it's there in the public records. So it's just a matter of time before, hey, we trust, based on the fact that this information was put there via the blockchain and the person that posted it had the authority to be able to do it, that information that these contractors are using from the civil engineer is authentic.
And so you would be able to, in very short order, begin to hoover up data off that blockchain in order to have a starting template for your project.
Yep.
So we see this already with the school districts. School districts in Utah and Kentucky and Ohio, I know for sure, and I'm sure it's the same elsewhere. They have a template for a school. You know, now in Kentucky, it's a 350 student school or a 750 student school. There's nothing in between.
Yep.
But at least there's a template out there. But why isn't that template available on the web? Why aren't all the specifications that are required, you know, the low bar, the minimum school requirement, why isn't it all available on the blockchain so that everybody can go and compete on a level playing field for that work? It doesn't exist yet. You know, they're all 2D drawings. It's very, very painful to go and figure out what the specifications are for a school in Kentucky right now. There ought to be a virtual model of a school that you could hoover up and, you know, begin to make changes and expand it to, you know, 550 students, or take the 750 student building and pare it down to 550 students.
Is there, and then we'll get to which platform is the best for this, and I immediately my mind thinks Ethereum is the best one, but we'll figure out. When it comes to how far are we away from, you know, that concrete company lays the concrete and immediately that job is done, stamped off, they go to their software, it's trusted that it was delivered and done, and payment is automatically sent.
Wow.
Are we 30, 40 years away from that?
I think we're very, very close to that. You just hit one of my favorite topics. You know, I wrote an article on this for the American Subcontractors Association. It's called Pay Me Now, Pay Me on the Blockchain.
Okay.
And the idea is that the technology's all there. Okay. We could make this happen, you know, on a custom home build or a hospital project right now. But the culture is the sticking point. So we can build the model of the built asset, and we can go through a reverse pull planning process with the entire team there, and we can get the concrete subcontractor and the excavation subcontractor and the civil engineer and the structural steel engineer and the steel fabricator and the steel erector. We can do a reverse pull planning where we stick a sticky on the wall and we say, here's our certificate of occupancy, and we can work our way backwards to the construction permit. There's a whole lot in between, but that entire team can load the resources on the wall as to what they need, okay? And then we can build that virtually. And we can push a button and watch it play. You can watch a model be built, and you can put it on a 2.5-year timeline, or you can put it on a 6-month timeline.
Yep.
It's all a matter of stretching or compressing resources. And you can build it virtually right now. So if we can build it virtually, then why, when the subcontractor responsible for the HVAC, for example, has finished putting the ductwork in, why can't they take a few pictures of that on their iPhone and send it along with a pay application to the construction manager or the general contractor for payment?
Yep.
Those images of the work as placed would be compared by an algorithm to the as-built BIM. So if they match, if what you purported to put in place and you've recorded with your pictures off your iPhone matches up with the virtual model, then we ought to be able to approve payment. And if we in turn put the $100 million for the project into an escrow,
Sure.
and we tokenize that $100 million, and everybody on the project is looking at that blockchain, and every service that gets delivered or every product or all labor all gets recorded, and it's just dollar for dollar, token to dollar. It's just a 1-for-1 ratio.
Sure.
As soon as you send in a pay application that shows your work matches the as-built BIM, then click paid, and the tokens should transfer to the sub, who can take them in to the bank, the lender who's put the $100 million in escrow, and receive out of that the fiat cash to pay their bill that day, right then.
So the one question comes up is, okay, well, the AC is in place, and it looks like it's in place, and it matches the BIM, but what if it doesn't turn on or cool?
Right. So, of course, you have to make sure that what you're delivering works.
Yep.
And this is an absolutely fascinating question, because this is the problem between the digitized world and the real world. And this is the bridge that we're talking about. These are the kinds of conundrums that we have to have good answers to, okay? In the integrated project delivery world, we have something called rolling punch lists. And a punch list usually comes out at the end of a project.
Sure.
Commissioning usually takes place at the end of the project. Now, if you get to the commissioning phase and we flip the switch and no cold air comes out of the system, you know, the engineer that created that system and the HVAC or mechanical contractor that put it in place are going to have to figure out what's wrong. Why isn't this working? So what I think we have to do is we have to tie this automatic sort of pie in the sky, fairy dust oriented payment system to real world milestones. And you get paid when the local government entity that's responsible for signing off on the plumbing has done the plumbing inspection.
Sure.
And, pardon me. Live.
That's what
podcasting.
happens. That's all right. I can knock it out. So you're going to get paid when the actual
just so at the milestones we've always had.
Sure.
You know, you're gonna, but at the milestones we've had in the past, you submit your pay application and it's 90 days before you get paid.
Yep.
And it's 90 days for a whole bunch of different reasons, but that costs everybody money. I've done with a friend of mine, Andrew Abernathy, who's a architect out of Arizona. He's done a lot of thinking on this stuff, for especially with respect to RFIs and change orders and pay applications.
Yep.
And he estimates that the cost of a pay application, the cost associated with producing a pay application, runs something on the order of $200,000 for each pay application for every $100,000 worth of, or $100 million worth of project. So if you have a $100 million project,
Yep.
it's going to cost the team and the project something on the order of $200,000 to produce each pay application.
Wow.
Because you've got 30 or 40 different subcontractors,
Yep.
all of their suppliers, and everybody is producing data, and that data is coming into that pay application, and it's getting thicker and thicker and thicker, and it eventually lands on the project manager's desk as a pay application, right? But that doesn't mean it gets paid. It goes from the project manager's job trailer over to the general contractor's home office. And there it gets subjected to a whole nother round of analysis. A bunch of the data gets recorded in Excel spreadsheets. A bunch of the data gets, manipulated in other ways. It finally leaves the general contractor's office and goes to the owner's office. They do double checks. Why is this all happening? Because nobody trusts anybody else. Because you can't trust the data that came to you. You've got to double check it.
Yep.
So it's back to the recreating the wheel
Sure.
again, because we can't trust the data. So it goes to the bank. Does the bank trust it? No. The bank double checks everything. And then there are banking regulations that require the bank to do a whole bunch more work on it. And all of this could be automated and brought through, as I described, to a point where if it matches and it's payable, then payment is instantaneous. And that would reduce and eliminate all of this waste and inefficiency that is associated with processing pay applications in the current environment. The same thing could happen with RFIs. The same thing could happen with change orders. There are a lot of paper processes that are very inefficient in the built environment, where if you just draw a big X through it and draw a red line between who needs this piece of information when, you can reduce exponentially the waste and inefficiency. And that's what the blockchain promises.
I tell you what, this conversation has been great. I know we are it's one of the longest we've ever had on the Cottrell Closing Experience Real Estate Talk over a cup of coffee, but it's so fascinating just to know what's on the horizon. And it's not, if you were to look this up, Google any blockchain conference and look at the companies that are involved in those conferences. It is Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. Every single company, every single sector is trying to figure out how they can maximize efficiencies utilizing blockchain. So when you mentioned, James, that this tsunami is coming, it is coming. And whether you're Joe the plumber, or you're Cottrell Title and Escrow, or you're getting ready to build a church, or you're trying to figure out the affordable housing crisis in Collier County, Florida, everything is going to circle around to eliminating these mass deficiencies. And the way that it looks to, all signs are pointing towards maximizing and understanding blockchain technology. So I am forever grateful that you took the time here. I'm looking forward to the presentation you're doing tomorrow to Collier County, or Southwest Florida, I should say, construction executives. But one last thing here before we leave. If you had to leave a parting note to say you're in the construction industry and you know that this is on the horizon, right? What should you be doing now as far as this, to wrap your head around it, or to where do you go for research, or what should you be doing if you were 20 years old or 22, or you're young and up-and-coming in the construction industry, and this is coming, the internet is coming, and it's 1993. Mm-hmm. What should they be doing?
Yeah, I think what we need to do is we need to be prepared to understand the digitization of construction and what the implications of that are. Everybody can start. I said earlier, you can just start simply.
Sure.
You can digitize your pay,
your workflow,
sure, and your pay process, and your own internal processes. Do it internally first, okay? And then be prepared to jump into this, what I call the collaborative sandbox, when you're called on to perform. So what I always tell my clients is, let's start small. We don't need to build a $100 million hospital using these tools and processes out the gate. I have a workshop that starts with children's building blocks. We build Katie's castle first. And then the next step is to go conduct what I call the dollhouse exercise. So form integrated teams, owner, contractor, and designer, form them in the community. And then all those teams build a dollhouse, and they build it virtually. And once you've completed the virtual plan, those are graded or, scored, and there's a competition to see who had the best virtual design. Then the teams physically build the dollhouses. And ultimately, you're going to put those dollhouses up at an auction where they're available at a silent auction to raise money for charity. And that's a really good exercise for a community to go through in order to sort of dip their toe in the virtual planning and design waters on the one hand, and then the integrated project delivery team, collaborative team exercise on the other. Now, currently, I don't know, I've never seen anyone do a blockchain piece of that.
Sure.
But that's something I have on my bucket list, to actually, have my dollhouse teams, they get their money. Maybe there's a limit on how much you can spend on your dollhouse. We don't want people going hog wild, but we could tokenize the dollars that are associated with the dollhouse exercise. You could say your limit is $500 in materials, or your limit is, $2,500 in materials, and you could tokenize that, and then actually use those tokens to pay the team and purchase supplies. You could have Home Depot involved. You could have Lowe's involved. You could have other, Ferguson Plumbing involved. You could work with their IT department, say, how are you going to accept? You're going to have a wallet that's created to accept our token, but it's part of the exercise we're going through here. I think those kinds of practical sort of nuts and bolts, how do we do it on I like to do things in a simple, low cost, low risk environment first, as opposed to what the federal government usually does, which is to announce a new program and cause everybody to jump off the deep end, jump into the deep end of the pool for the first time.
Excellent. Sitting here again with attorney James Salmon out of Cincinnati, a blockchain expert in the construction industry. Thank you again so much. We're going to wrap up here for today, but we'll definitely have James on again, and really looking forward to watching the next 3, 4, 5 years. It's going to happen a lot sooner than anybody expects. I think that's the consensus from everybody that has their finger on the pulse. But he's one of the most knowledgeable in the business, so this is great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, James, for having me. Appreciate it.